In Montenevi, the snow covered the streets with a serenity that seemed to invite everyone to pause. Christmas lights illuminated the windows, and the residents, wrapped in thick coats, walked towards the church for midnight mass. It was the time of year when the extraordinary seemed closest, when people opened their hearts to reflect on the meaning of life, faith, and new beginnings. However, for Julia, Christmas was always about more than celebration. It was a reminder of something greater, something she couldn't ignore, the feeling that her life had a special purpose. Sitting by the fireplace in her home, Julia gazed into the gently dancing flames, as if searching for answers that always seemed to elude her. She knew she was different, not because of what she did or had, but because of the way she saw the world. While others seemed satisfied with the festivities and the presents, Julia felt that Christmas was a calling, an invitation to something deeper, more transformative. That night, as the church chimes echoed through the village, Julia remembered all the times she had noticed signs she couldn't ignore. They were small, but unmistakable. Each one seemed to whisper that there was a purpose waiting to be uncovered. What about you? Have you ever felt that Christmas brings with it a reminder of your own purpose? Today, we're going to explore the 9 signs that show you're a chosen one. Perhaps, by recognizing them, you will also realize that the signs have always been there, pointing to the greater plan that God has for you. Before continuing, take the opportunity to subscribe to our channel, where we share stories and reflections that help you understand God's purposes and live according to the call God has placed on your life. Now, let's dive into the signs that make Christmas a unique opportunity to discover your true essence. Julia's authenticity was a characteristic that had always accompanied her, like a trademark of her soul. She couldn't pretend or wear masks, even when it seemed like the easy way out. This sincerity, while admirable, often put her in uncomfortable situations, especially in a world where superficiality is commonplace. That Christmas Eve, Julia was invited to a get-together with former work colleagues. The atmosphere was lively, with laughter and conversations that seemed to have no end. But as she listened to people commenting on superficial achievements and making disguised criticisms of other colleagues, she felt an uneasiness in her heart. For Julia, taking part in a conversation just to fit in was the opposite of what she believed. She quietly slipped away and went out onto the balcony, where she found an old friend sitting, apparently disconnected from the party. They started chatting, and Julia discovered that he was going through a difficult time, feeling lost and unmotivated. With her characteristic authenticity, Julia shared some of her own struggles and how her faith and connection with God had helped her. That conversation not only comforted her friend, but also inspired her to seek a new direction for her life. This authenticity was what made Julia special. Her presence not only enlightened others, but also challenged them to be more honest with themselves. She understood that God had called her to live genuinely, without succumbing to the masks that the world constantly offers us. As Matthew 5:37 teaches us, "Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Whatever you do is from the evil one." Julia's life reflected this truth, as her authenticity was a direct expression of her faith and the divine purpose that God had planted in her heart. From a young age, Julia knew that she hadn't been raised to follow an ordinary path. She was grateful for the blessings in her life, but felt that there was something beyond what the world around her offered. She couldn't accept the idea that existence was limited to working, accumulating possessions, and following social conventions. For her, there was a higher calling, something her heart recognized, but could not yet fully explain. During that Christmas, this desire for something more became evident. While others were preoccupied with making sure the presents were well wrapped or the meal was perfect. Julia wondered how she could use that moment to impact someone's life in a more meaningful way. She decided to visit a shelter that the local church had set up for families made homeless by the cold. There, she met people who had lost almost everything, but who still kept hope alive. Talking to a mother who was struggling to look after her children, Julia felt a deep connection. It wasn't just empathy. It was as if she knew she was exactly where God wanted her to be. As she drove home that evening, she thought about how much there was still to do, not just for that Christmas, but for her whole life. She felt that God was calling her to step out of her comfort zone, to explore the limits of her faith, and to discover how she could serve better. This desire for something more was no ordinary dissatisfaction. It was a sign that Julia was chosen. Just as the Magi from the east followed the star in search of Jesus, Julia felt that there was an inner star guiding her towards a greater purpose. Romans 12:11 exhorts us, "Never lack zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord." Julia embraced this message as a reminder that her desire for something beyond the ordinary was an expression of her divine calling, a compass that guided her to where God wanted her to be. Trials were a constant in Julia's life. From the loss of loved ones to financial challenges, she had faced more than many people around her. However, instead of getting down on herself, Julia always saw these difficulties as part of a bigger plan. The previous Christmas, while everyone was gathered to celebrate, Julia felt apprehensive. She had just lost an important contract at work, and the future seemed uncertain. Even so, she decided to focus on what she could control: her faith. During Christmas Mass, as the choir sang Silent Night, Julia was overcome by an inexplicable peace. It was as if God was saying to her, "Trust me, I'm working on something bigger." This moment strengthened her, and she realized that the trials were not a punishment, but a preparation. Each challenge she faced made her more resilient, more compassionate, and more aware of the suffering of others. Shortly afterwards, Julia was invited to lead a community project that would help people in vulnerable situations. Her experience of life's difficulties gave her the empathy and wisdom needed to inspire others. She was able to say, with conviction, "I understand what you're going through. God has a purpose for it." Romans 5:3-4 says, "Tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance, approved character, and approved character, hope." Julia didn't just believe these words, she lived them, showing that every trial was a stepping stone to something greater. One of Julia's greatest discoveries was realizing that the difficulties she faced in her life had a purpose beyond herself. They prepared her to help other people in their own battles. She became, without realizing it, a guide, someone who brought clarity and comfort to those who were lost or discouraged. The previous Christmas, while Julia was helping to distribute food to needy families, she met a woman who was struggling to raise 2 children on her own. The woman told her how she had lost hope, but Julia, with her experience and empathy, talked about the very difficulties she had overcome. Her words weren't just comforting, they were inspiring. The woman started attending local church meetings, and months later, found the strength to rebuild her life. Julia realized that her trials had opened up paths that other people could follow. Every difficult moment she had faced had been a preparation to guide others on their journeys. Even in the midst of her own challenges, she always found time to help, listen, and support those around her. Isaiah 58:10 says, "If you spend yourself on behalf of the hungry and meet the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will be like noonday." Julia was a living manifestation of this promise. Her life was a reflection of how God uses our struggles to make us beacons of hope for others. Julia had always refused to accept easy or superficial answers. She had an insatiable curiosity for the truth, not only about the world around her, but also about herself and the purpose of her life. While many were comfortable with routine and simple explanations, Julia felt a constant need to explore, question, and understand. One Christmas Eve, at a family dinner, Julia asked a question that left everyone speechless. Why do we celebrate the birth of Jesus, but often forget what he really taught us about love and forgiveness? For Julia, Christmas wasn't just a celebration. It was an opportunity to reflect deeply on her faith and her commitment to Christ's teachings. This search for truth shaped everything she did. Julia spent hours reading the Bible, participated in discussions about faith and philosophy, and was always open to learning from different perspectives. She believed that understanding God's purpose required not only faith, but also a willingness to question and seek. Proverbs 2:3-5 reminds us, "If you cry out for understanding and for insight, if you seek wisdom as one seeks silver, and search for it as one searches for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." Julia lived this search daily, knowing that each answer she found brought her closer to her purpose. One of the most obvious signs that Julia was different was her constant feeling of not quite fitting in. Even in her own family, she often felt that she saw the world in a unique way. While others were content to follow traditions without questioning them, Julia was always searching for deeper meaning. This sense of being different often made her feel isolated, especially at family gatherings during Christmas. Once, when discussing how to spend the festivities, Julia suggested that instead of exchanging presents, the family should do something to help those in need. Her suggestion was not well received, and she felt misunderstood. Nevertheless, she stood her ground and decided to spend part of that Christmas helping out at the local shelter. What Julia learned was that being the outsider was not a defect, but a calling. It was her way of marching to the beat of a drum that others couldn't hear. Instead of seeking acceptance, she embraced her uniqueness, understanding that her different vision was a gift that connected her more deeply to God's purpose. 1 Peter 2:9 tells us, "You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Julia finally understood that her difference was a sign that she had been set apart for something greater. Julia was, above all, a kind person. Even after facing disappointment, hurt, and even injustice, she never stopped believing in the goodness of others. It was something that came from within, like a flame that no adversity could extinguish. At Christmas, this kindness manifested itself even more clearly. She always found a way to help someone, even when she had little to offer. One year, when she found out that an elderly neighbor would be spending Christmas alone, Julia invited her to her home. She prepared a simple but loving supper and spent the evening listening to her neighbor's stories. This kindness was not an act of obligation, but a natural expression of who Julia was. In Matthew 25:40, Jesus says, "Whatever you did to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did to me." Julia lived this passage in every gesture, showing that being chosen also means spreading love and compassion, even in the smallest acts. Being exceptional doesn't mean being perfect, and Julia knew that. Her exceptionality came from the way she dealt with the world, the generosity that flowed from her, and the way she saw people and situations. Many people saw her as special, but Julia humbly didn't believe that there was anything extraordinary about her. However, the truth was that her actions spoke for themselves. That Christmas, Julia organized an event at the local church to collect food for vulnerable families. She spent days mobilizing volunteers, visiting homes, and publicizing the project. When the event took place, it was a success. Dozens of baskets were assembled and distributed. But the most striking thing for Julia was what happened afterwards. A woman who had received help came up to her and said, "I had no hope, but you brought a little light into my life. Thank you for caring." This ability to impact the lives of others was evidence of her exceptionality. Julia didn't seek recognition or rewards. She did what she did because she believed in the power of kindness. Her heart knew no measure of effort when it came to helping. This characteristic also attracted criticism. Some people questioned her willingness to always help, saying that others might be taking advantage of her kindness. But Julia never let these negative voices affect her essence. "If God has put this mission in my heart," she said, "I will follow it." In Galatians 6:9 it says, "And let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap if we do not give up." Julia reflected this truth. Her kindness was not a weakness, but a sign of her spiritual strength and her willingness to fulfill the divine call. As kind and selfless as she was, Julia often faced criticism and rejection. Some people didn't understand her way of being, and others simply felt uncomfortable around her. It wasn't something Julia did on purpose, but her light, her integrity, and her natural kindness often exposed the insecurities and flaws of others. Once, during a Christmas get-together at the company where she worked, Julia suggested that instead of organizing a gift exchange between colleagues, they donate the money raised to a local charity. Although some supported the idea, some said, "Why do you always have to complicate things? Can't we just have fun?" Julia tried to explain that her intention was only to help, but realized that her words were not well received. These situations saddened her, but they also strengthened her. Julia understood that not everyone was ready to accept the greater purpose that God places in everyone. She learned not to react with resentment, but with compassion, knowing that criticism often came from places of pain or misunderstanding. John 15:19 says, "If you were of the world, he would love you as his own. But you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world. Therefore the world hates you." Julia found solace in these words, understanding that the rejection she faced was part of her journey as a chosen one. Over time, she began to use these experiences as opportunities for reflection and prayer. Instead of getting upset, Julia asked God to give her the patience and wisdom to continue fulfilling her mission, even when she wasn't understood. That Christmas Eve, sitting in front of the fireplace with the lights flashing in the background, Julia reflected on all the signs that had marked her life. Each one pointed to something bigger, something she was finally beginning to understand. She wasn't perfect, nor was she without mistakes or challenges. But there was a clear purpose to her existence. God had called her to be a light in a world that is often lost in darkness. What about you? Listening to this story, can you identify any of these signs in your own life? Perhaps you felt that you don't quite fit in, that you're searching for something greater, or that you're facing trials that seem insurmountable. These could be signs that you too are a chosen one, someone set apart for a special purpose. If you feel that these signs resonate with your life, I invite you to begin a journey of self-discovery and connection with God. Take the opportunity to learn about the Chosen Devotional, a 40-day spiritual journey that can completely transform your perspective. Just as Julia discovered her purpose, you too will be challenged and inspired throughout this journey. Each day, you'll be given scripture-based reflections, Bible verses, and practical questions to apply the teachings to your life. This is no ordinary reading. It's an opportunity for spiritual transformation. Take the time to immerse yourself in this experience and allow God to direct your steps. At the end of the 40 days, you will have greater clarity about God's plan for your life and will be prepared to live with greater purpose and faith. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more inspiring stories and content that will help you recognize God's signs in your life. May God's peace and light be with you this Christmas and always. Remember that you are not alone on this journey. There is a greater purpose guiding your steps even when the paths seem uncertain. I'm George, your spiritual leader, and I'm here to help you recognize God's signs in your life and to live with purpose and faith. My mission is to guide you on this spiritual journey, sharing reflections, teachings, and stories that illuminate your path and strengthen your connection with the Creator. If you felt that this message touched your heart, leave a comment and share your experience. Together, we can grow in faith and support each other in discovering our divine calling. May God bless you abundantly, and may this Christmas be a rebirth of hope, love, and purpose in your life. See you at the next meeting.